Okay, so now that we have this finished profile, what we're going to do next is give this profile a thickness using the push-pull tool. So we're going to extrude it 2 3/4 inches for our total width. So this is how wide it's going to be at the widest point before we taper it in. And speaking of that taper, before we taper it in and kind of give it an angled look on both sides, this is probably the easiest time that we could create two cutouts. So when the phone is sitting up in this holder here, kind of that first shape that you made, we want to create a cutout so that the charger can plug in underneath, wrap around, and then exit out the back of the phone stand. So we're going to do that prior to making that taper. So first thing you'll do is create a guideline that snaps to the midpoint of the object, and then two more parallel guidelines that go 3/8 on each side. Make a rectangle, and then push-pull that through to the other side. Okay, so now we have a notch where your phone charger can fit in. The second notch for the cable to continue is going to be right here, and that's going to take a couple of more steps. So the first thing to understand is we actually want this cutout to run from this bottom edge down about as far as it can go, which would be equal to this kind of this 1/8 up. So we're going to use some inferencing to make that happen. So I'm going to grab a guideline from the side here and drop it right at the top of this diagonal. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a horizontal on this vertical face, and I'm going to use that as the top of our cutout. So from here, it's similar to the last cutout. A vertical guideline in the middle, 3/8 on each side. Then we'll create a rectangle. And then in this case, we're not going to simply push-pull it like we did for this larger one up here. Because we don't have two parallel faces, so in other words, because this face and this face are not parallel, we can't just push-pull through and create a hole. It just doesn't work that way. So, if we did try that, we would get something like this. If I went even further, to here, it just doesn't work. So we're going to do something a little different. What I'm going to do instead is double click this rectangle to select only the rectangle, and we're going to right click and we're going to make it a group. So the rest of the phone stand is still ungrouped, and then this rectangle in and of itself is a group. We're going to edit that group by double clicking it, and then we're going to create a shape that's push-pulled through, completely through, and out the other side. So the distance doesn't really matter as long as it's long enough to come out all the way. So it shouldn't look like this. It should be all the way out. Now what you can do is select that group, right-click and explode it. So we really only needed it to be a group for a short time. Then we're going to select everything, the whole object. You're going to right-click and you're going to choose Intersect Faces with Selection. And once you do that, you can get rid of this rectangular prism that used to be a group. And what's cool about that is that it creates some new faces, in the phone stand itself. Faces that used to belong to that rectangle are now part of this cutout. See, so the whole thing is solid, even though we don't have parallel faces. Okay, so once you have that, we don't need any of these guidelines anymore, so we're going to just delete those, and we're going to get ready to make the next portion. The next portion is going to be that taper. That's actually going to be the final portion of this phone stand. So just like we did before, we made a temporary group. We're going to do that right now with the entire phone stand. So I'm going to go ahead and group that, and I'm going to make a couple of rectangles. So the furthest point, to the front, or I guess if we're looking at it this way, we can call it maybe the leftmost point on this object is right here. So I want to make a rectangle that's coplanar with the top view, face, or the top view, and we just want this to be pretty big, bigger than it needs to be, and you'll see what I mean by needs to be in a sec. So we're going to pull it down so that it goes a little bit further, beyond the bottom of the phone stand, and a little bit taller than the top of the phone stand, and just make sure it goes back beyond the phone stand. And we want this front leading edge here to be right on this point, because that's where we started it, right? That's where that corner was. And we want that on both sides. So again, right where this corner is, make sure it's large enough. And then we can push, pull, and I can use this to make sure that the heights are the same. They don't have to be the same. Again, they just have to be bigger than the phone stand itself. And now we can go one at a time, triple click, and we want to rotate each of these big blocks 15 degrees towards the phone stand. And you want that pivot point to be this point right here. Now, given the orientation of this, right, I have my phone stand as being upright. I need this protractor to be blue, with the orientation I have now. If it's black, then it's not going to pivot evenly. So if you can't get it to be blue, or you can't get it to be, one of the standard colors, then what we can do is, find a reference over here where it is blue, hold shift, and it's going to lock it to that orientation. And now I can click again so that my pivot point is right here. So I'll pull out a handle, rotate it 15 degrees. And then I'll do the same with the other block. Now once I have those in place, I'm going to explode the group I made before, select everything, and then again intersect faces with selection. Now once I do that, I'm just going to get rid of all this block and anything that's inside this block, which by the way includes just anything that was encapsulated by the block. You'll have to go in and clean up a little bit. Now you should notice that I lost the face that was here. Now we can't leave it like that. That has to get healed up. So to heal that, you should be able to just grab a line, draw it across the face here, and everything else should fill in. And if that happens, erase that line after the fact. All right, we'll do the same thing on the other side. Another line to heal it. And then we're pretty much done. I'm going to make sure this is, yep, no stray lines or anything. So now the very last thing, and actually, I don't think I can do this with this version. I'm using SketchUp Make. Let me try. It should be File, Export, 3D Model. Yeah, so when you folks do this and you do, with SketchUp Pro, and you go to Export Model, and again, let me show you one more time. That's going to File, Export, 3D Model. You'll have an option here when it says Save as Type to save it as a .stl file. And that's what we need. An STL file is what we're going to need to be able to 3D print these. So when you're done, make sure you save it as a SketchUp file, because I need that, and then also save it as a .stl file. Having those two, you'd be ready for 3D printing.